Picture the Mongol war machine. One rider, one bow, an open horizon. No giant supply convoy, no paved military road, no warehouse filled with standardized equipment. Just a mounted warrior moving faster than the armies sent to stop him. It looks almost weightless. But a single Mongol warrior may have required 3 to 5 horses. Now scale that up. A nominal force of 95,000 warriors could imply somewhere between 285,000 and 475,000 horses. Not soldiers. Horses. That is not simply a cavalry force. It is a moving biological economy. So the central question is not how the Mongols avoided the cost of war. They did not. The real question is this. Who carried the cost? Imagine that you have been asked to operate the Mongol war machine at the beginning of the 13th century. Your assignment is not modest. You must move large forces across grasslands, deserts, mountains, and rivers. You must defeat armies in the field, capture fortified cities, transmit orders across enormous distances, and keep powerful commanders loyal. You must also do this without railroads, modern warehouses, or a centralized defense industry. Your first advantage is organization. John of Plano Carpini, a papal envoy who visited the Mongol world during the 13th century, described a decimal military structure. 10 men formed an arban. 10 arbans formed a unit of 100. 10 units of 100 formed a mingan of 1,000. 10 mingans formed a tumen of 10,000. Simple. Easy to divide, easy to combine, easy to command. It was also brutally effective as a disciplinary system. Carpini recorded that responsibility could be collective. If one soldier fled without authorization, others could be punished. If part of a group advanced while the rest refused, those who stayed behind could be executed. This was more than military discipline. It turned the unit into its own monitoring system. Each soldier had a reason to watch the others because one person's failure could become everyone's problem. Supervision was partly outsourced to the soldiers themselves. Around 1204 to 1206, surviving accounts and modern reconstructions describe the new imperial organization as containing 95 nominal mingans. On paper, that meant 95,000 men. The records identify 88 commanders, with some controlling more than one mingan. But nominal matters. A mingan did not always contain exactly 1,000 soldiers in the field. Military organizations have always looked cleaner in administrative documents than they do after illness, casualties, desertion, and ordinary confusion. Still, this structure gives us the scale. You are not managing a loose crowd of horsemen. You are managing households, commanders, animals, equipment, and obligations. Now open the expense sheet. You need horses, bows, arrows, armor, axes, ropes, repair tools, food, water, pasture, replacement animals, messengers, intelligence, engineers, bridges, siege equipment, rewards for soldiers, rewards for commanders, garrisons for conquered territory. Then you need an administrative system capable of turning victory into continuing revenue. That should be extremely expensive. Yet the early Mongol army had no surviving uniform, empire-wide cash salary table for its original mounted forces. Warriors commonly maintained their own animals and equipment. Compensation could come through booty, livestock, captives, political privilege, and access to the resources of conquered territories. The central treasury did not purchase every horse or bow. It did not pay every cost directly. That is the first clue. The warrior financed part of the army. The herd financed mobility. The landscape supplied fuel. Conquered populations supplied labor and infrastructure. Future victories helped pay for loyalty in the present. From the ruler's perspective, this looked efficient, but the cost had not vanished. It had moved. According to Carpini, a Mongol warrior might carry 2 or 3 bows, roughly 3 quivers, an axe, rope, and tools for repairing arrows and leather equipment. He was not simply an employee reporting for duty. He was closer to a small military business arriving with some of its own capital. His household helped maintain the horses. His equipment required wood, horn, sinew, leather, metal, and continual repair. His animals represented transportation, food capacity, and stored wealth. The state could mobilize those resources without buying everything through a central procurement office. That reduced the ruler's immediate cash requirement. It did not reduce the total economic cost. The reward system also depended heavily on successful campaigns. Soldiers and commanders could receive livestock, booty, captives, and rights over conquered resources. Victory brought assets. That meant military service could, at least in theory, pay for itself after a successful campaign. A commander who received tribute rights or control over taxable households did not need the same cash salary that a fully centralized state might provide. The system connected compensation to expansion. Success generated the resources needed to reward the people producing that success. For a while, that was a powerful cycle. Then comes the obvious problem. What happens when conquest slows? The horses still need food, equipment still breaks, commanders still expect rewards, garrisons still have to remain in place. The expenses continue. The new booty does not. Later Mongol states had to formalize the arrangement. In the Ilkhanate, especially under Kazan Khan, the Ikta system assigned revenue from land to support military personnel. Rather than receiving one universal salary from a central payroll, a commander or military unit could receive the right to collect income from a defined territory. In Yuan territory, military households could receive paper money, grain, silk, and emergency assistance. These later systems reveal the costs that rapid expansion had partly hidden. Once you conquer territory, soldiers cannot be supported only by the moment of conquest. They must survive between campaigns. Garrisons must remain, military households must endure bad seasons. And officers need enough support to prevent the nearest farming village from becoming an unofficial payroll office. Surviving records suggest that underfunded troops sometimes took food and property directly from local populations. When formal compensation weakened, extraction continued. It simply became less controlled. The Mongols did not eliminate the payroll. They transformed it into private investment, extraction rights, and expectations of future victory. The ledger became less visible. The obligation stayed exactly where it was. And the soldier was only part of the expense. The horses were larger. The familiar image shows one warrior riding one horse. Operationally, that image is wrong. Modern historical estimates commonly suggest 3 to 5 horses per warrior. Morris Rasabi's research also notes multiple reserve animals, including at least 2 spare horses associated with heavy cavalry in the material he examined. The reason is not mysterious. Horses get tired. The Mongols did not solve this by demanding greater commitment from the horse. They changed horses. A warrior could rotate between mounts over long distances. Other animals carried equipment. Mares supplied milk. In an emergency, horses could provide meat. One herd performed several jobs at once. Transport, food supply, reserve capital. That redundancy created speed. Consider a nominal tumen of 10,000 warriors. At 3 horses per soldier, it would involve around 30,000 horses. At 5, approximately 50,000. Now scale that to the nominal 95,000-man organization associated with the early empire. At 3 horses per warrior, the implied herd is 285,000. At 4, 380,000. At 5, 475,000. These are calculations, not figures from a surviving imperial horse census. The real total would vary with unit strength, military role, and campaign conditions. But the order of magnitude matters. The Mongol military was not merely a cavalry force. It was a fleet of living vehicles. Horses can reproduce. They can graze. They can move without roads. They can also become sick, starve, and die. Every additional horse improved mobility while creating another demand for grass, water, labor, and replacement animals. A conventional army might transport grain and fodder in wagons. Those wagons require animals, roads, and drivers. They slow the force and create a visible supply line. The Mongol system reduced that dependence by spreading equipment across many animals and allowing those animals to feed from the surrounding environment. Columns could move along separate routes, reducing pressure on any single path, then reunite near the target. That created a second advantage. The enemy had to guess. During the Central European campaign of 1241, Rashid al-Din's account has been interpreted as suggesting a force of around 40,000 cavalry for the wider operation, although the estimate remains contested. The army did not move as one simple block. Different columns operated along different routes. At the Battle of Mohi on April 11, 1241, only part of that wider force was present. Sources also describe scouting, bridge operations, and coordinated movement. This imposed costs on the opponent. When a mobile army threatens several routes, the defender must protect several routes. Garrisons are divided, supplies are placed in multiple locations, Troops are held in reserve because nobody knows where the main attack will appear. Mongol mobility multiplied the enemy's expenses, but that mobility still had a price. For a force of 100,000 warriors, the same estimate implies 300,000 to 500,000 horses requiring access to pasture. Horses did not eliminate logistics. Horses were the logistics. The Mongols could carry dried meat, dried dairy products, and other compact provisions. They could consume milk from their animals. Sheep, goats, and horses could become food when necessary. But the most important resource was grass. A horse feeding itself from pasture does not require the state to transport the same volume of fodder by wagon. This was the basic mechanism. The army outsourced fuel production to the environment. Grass became energy. Horses turned that energy into movement. Movement became military power. The treasury never received an invoice from the steppe. That made the system look cheap. A force of 10,000 warriors might need grazing for 30,000 to 50,000 horses. A force of 100,000 could imply 300,000 to 500,000 animals. Mongol armies could spread over wide fronts, so their animals did not all graze in one place. But geography decided whether that was possible. Open grasslands supported large herds. Dense forests did not. Mountains narrowed movement. Wet terrain reduced speed. Rice-growing regions could be agriculturally wealthy while offering too little pasture for hundreds of thousands of horses. Deserts created distance between water and forage. The Mongol system was highly effective where the environment matched its design. Elsewhere, the advantage became harder to maintain. Sieges were especially difficult. A mobile army could spread its horses across a large area. A siege forced warriors, engineers, equipment, and animals to remain near one target. The grazing pressure concentrated. Nearby supplies disappeared. The longer the siege lasted, the less self-sufficient the force became. Movement created efficiency. Stillness exposed the bill. Permanent occupation created the same problem. Conquest allowed the army to continue forward. Administration required people to remain behind. Garrisons needed food through every season. Roads and relay stations had to stay active. Local populations now needed to produce predictable taxes rather than one-time booty. The model shifted from expansion to maintenance. Then came winter. Deep snow could prevent horses from reaching the grass beneath them. The animals might be standing directly over their food and still be unable to eat. Once grazing failed, the biological vehicle fleet became a collection of liabilities. The rider looked independent because the landscape was doing the work. Remove the grass, and the independence disappears. Local communities often absorb the difference. Villages supplied food and livestock. Pastoral groups lost grazing access. Requisition could keep the army moving in the short term while weakening the production needed later. A commander received supplies. A village lost reserves. The army moved forward. The future tax base moved backward. The landscape was not scenery. It was military infrastructure. That explains how the army traveled. It does not explain how horse archers captured fortified cities. For that, the Mongols needed specialists. A mounted archer can defeat an army in the field. A stone wall remains unmoved. Across China, Central Asia, and Persia, the Mongols encountered fortifications that required engineering and specialized siege knowledge. Their solution was to acquire that knowledge through conquest. Research identifies engineers and technical workers from Chinese, Khitan, Jurchen, Persian, Central Asian, and Muslim backgrounds. They supported traction trebuchets, counterweight trebuchets, siege crossbows, defensive structures, excavation work, and early gunpowder devices. The empire did not need every technology to originate in Mongolia. It needed to identify skilled people, relocate them, and place them inside future campaigns. Conquest expanded the empire's technical capacity. A captured engineer might be more useful alive than dead. An artisan community could produce weapons, repair equipment, or build the machinery needed for the next siege. Some specialists received status or protection. Others were forced into service. Mongol commanders gained capabilities that would have taken years to develop internally. The conquered communities lost skilled labor. Sometimes a city faced siege technology operated by people taken from an earlier conquest. Construction costs could also be moved outward. Timber was sourced near the campaign. Local workers and captives built ladders, shelters, earthworks, and siege equipment. Heavy machines could be assembled near the target rather than transported intact across the continent. That reduced transport costs. It increased local extraction. There was no reliable empire-wide price list for these machines in the supply data. The cost appeared in another form: requisitioned wood, compulsory labor, captured expertise, diverted production. The equipment was expensive. The method of payment was coercion, and specialists still needed food, protection, and coordination. Heavy machinery slowed movement. Sieges concentrated soldiers and horses in one area. Expertise solved the technical problem. It did not solve the supply problem. After a city fell, another calculation began. Destroy too much and future revenue disappeared. Preserve too much local autonomy and resistance might return. The empire had to decide what to destroy, what to capture, and what to keep productive. This was not only warfare, it was asset management. The same growing empire also needed information. Fast armies are less useful when their orders move slowly. The Mongol relay system, commonly called the Yam, transmitted reports, commands, and diplomatic messages across long distances. A rider traveled one stage, changed to a fresh horse, and continued. Stations supplied animals, food, shelter, and personnel. A paisa identified people authorized to use the network. Modern studies estimate that messengers could travel around 200 to 300 kilometers per day under suitable conditions. Accounts associated with Gazan's reformed Ilkhanate system report urgent messages moving at up to approximately 360 kilometers per day. Under Gazan, major stations were described as roughly 18 kilometers apart, with about 15 horses assigned to each station. Marco Polo described a much larger Yuan network. Depending on the version, his account refers to more than 200,000 horses, or more than 300,000, along with more than 10,000 station establishments. The figures are disputed. They are not a precise administrative audit. Even so, the scale is useful. 200,000 horses across 10,000 stations gives a derived average of at least 20 horses per station. 300,000 gives at least 30. The network gave the central state rapid information and coordination. For the authorized traveler, it was convenient. For the station village, it was work. Households near the route could be required to provide horses, fodder, lodging, food, and labor. Thousands of local obligations became one imperial communications network. The sender enjoyed the speed. The sender did not raise the horse. That created an incentive problem. Officials using paisa privileges did not always pay the real cost of their journeys. Horses could be overused. Non-urgent travelers consumed resources intended for military communication. The replacement cost fell on local communities. The center received the value. The edge received the wear. Gazan's reforms show how severe this became. Old paisas were canceled. Orders more than 30 years old could be invalidated. Access was restricted more closely to urgent government and military use. Non-urgent aristocratic envoys could be required to pay their own expenses. The Yam was not simply a postal network. It was command infrastructure financed partly through compulsory local service. The Mongols also found ways to change the cost of resistance itself. Our surrendering city could preserve some population, production, and local authority. A resisting city required siege equipment, concentrated troops, engineers, and time. Time was expensive. Horses kept eating. Soldiers consumed supplies. Other enemies had time to prepare. A stationary army lost part of its mobility advantage. Severe punishment of selected resisting cities could influence the decisions of the next cities. The destruction was expensive. The reputation could make future sieges cheaper. The Outrar crisis shows how quickly one economic decision could expand into something much larger. In 1218, a commercial caravan under Mongol protection arrived at Otrar in the Khwarezmian Empire. Juwaini and Rashid al-Din describe its seizure and the killing of its members. The group is commonly reported at around 450 merchants and attendants, although the details vary. The governor accused the caravan of espionage and confiscated its goods. Genghis Khan sent envoys. They were killed or humiliated. A short-term asset seizure became a strategic disaster. Modern estimates for the following Mongol invasion range from roughly 75,000 to 200,000 troops. A commonly used range is around 100,000 to 135,000. Some medieval chroniclers offered far larger claims. Rashid ad-Din gave more than 600,000. Juzjani reported 800,000. Those figures are generally treated as exaggerated. Even the more conservative estimates represent an enormous mobilization. The Khwarezmian government gained the value of one caravan. It then faced tens of thousands of warriors, several horses per warrior, siege specialists, and multiple operational columns. A very expensive confiscation. Yet destruction created its own trade-off. It could discourage resistance. It could also erase future revenue. A dead artisan produced nothing. An empty city paid no taxes. Burned farmland could not support a garrison. The empire needed to balance punishment with preservation. The objective was not simply to destroy walls. It was to make the next walls cheaper to open. During expansion, every conquest could add labor, taxes, animals, and expertise. That produced an illusion. Each new territory appeared to finance the next one, until the direction of resources reversed. By now, the pattern is clear. Warrior households carried part of the equipment cost. Pastures supplied biological fuel. Conquered specialists supplied technology. Station communities supplied yam, horses, food, and labor. Commanders received land revenue, taxes, and booty. Each arrangement solved a real problem. Together, they made the military system look unusually inexpensive. But the costs were not low. They were distributed. The ruler gained lower immediate cash expenses. Commanders gained revenue and captured assets. Successful warriors gained booty and status. Officials gained rapid transportation. The people carrying the cost were scattered across the empire. Warrior households maintained equipment and animals. Herders absorbed grazing pressure. Villages supported the yam. Farmers supplied food and taxes. Conquered cities supplied workers and specialists. Currency holders absorbed some of the pressure when governments issued more paper money. No single balance sheet showed the whole system. That was one of its strengths. It was also why the risks were easy to miss. During expansion, new resources kept arriving, but conquest could not continue at the same pace forever. Eventually, the state had to govern. Garrisons remained. Stations became permanent. Commanders expected recurring income. Military households faced bad seasons and an animal disease. Maintenance replaced momentum. The Mongol war machine was not cheap. It was very good at making the cost appear somewhere else. Then the pasture failed. During the early 14th century, severe climatic stress affected northern Yuan territory. Deep snow and unfavorable conditions reduced access to grazing. Livestock died. Military households lost animals that served as transportation, food reserves, wealth, and military capital. The army did not merely lose horses. The economic unit supporting the warrior began to fail. Pastoral populations moved south. Some became refugees. The source material even reports families selling children during extreme distress. The losses now traveled back toward the state. Between 1301 and 1329, research using the official Yuan history records more than 10 million ding in paper money relief and approximately 1.5 million dan of grain. That grain is estimated at around 75,000 metric tons. Average relief came to approximately 435,000 ding per year. Estimated annual Yuan government revenue during the same broad period was around 9 million ding. Relief for northern Mongol populations therefore represented roughly 5% of annual revenue. That does not mean relief spending alone destroyed the Yuan state. It did not. Political conflict, monetary pressure, environmental stress, and administrative problems all mattered. But the ratio changes how we understand the army. A military population that once looked partly self-financing had become a recurring fiscal obligation. Between 1319 and 1322, paper money allocations to Mongol populations increased roughly 10 times. 10 times! In 1324, the government allocated 290,000 ding to return displaced people north. That was approximately 39% of all paper money issued that year. 39%! In 1340, one relief operation involved 82,200 ding and 1,200 den of grain. Another involved roughly 1 million ding for soldiers. 13 northern relay stations received 13,000 ding. The military system did not suddenly become expensive in the 14th century. It had always been expensive. Earlier, the pasture paid part of the bill. Herds stored wealth outside the treasury. Warrior households maintained military capital. Villages supported the communications network. When livestock and pasture failed, those hidden subsidies stopped working. The state had to replace grass with grain. They had to replace animal wealth with paper money. Military households moved from supporting the empire to receiving support from it. That is the real reframe. The system's decentralization created flexibility. It also hid the exposure until the underlying assets failed. The Yuan state faced another pressure as well. War required money. During the final campaign against the Southern Song, records indicate that in 1276, silver from local reserve warehouses was transferred toward the capital for military use. The supplied records identify 65 reserve warehouses. Recorded exchange arrangements included roughly 1 tael of silver for 2 guan of paper money in one direction and 1 tael for 2.5 guan in the other. A fee of around 3% was recorded during one period. These were not permanent exchange rates across the entire Yuan era. Conditions changed, but the mechanism is still visible. Silver reserves supported confidence. Military spending consumed silver. After 1276, new paper issuance was not always matched by sufficient reserves. In 1287, the government introduced the Jiuan Chao. Later fiscal pressure contributed to expanded issuance and serious depreciation. War was not the only cause, but reserve assets used for immediate military needs were no longer available to support the monetary system afterward. The victory expanded the territory. The financing weakened part of the system needed to govern it. The immediate problem was solved. Another problem moved closer. The Mongol war machine's hidden costs passed through several balance sheets. The warrior household, the grazing land, the conquered community, the relay village, the tax system, the currency holder. The empire did not avoid payment. It transferred it. Return to the lone rider. Behind him are several horses. Behind those horses are herding households. Beyond them are grazing territories, station villages, conquered farms, engineers, tax collectors, and monetary reserves. The rider was the visible edge. The empire was the supply chain. The romantic version is 1 rider, 1 bow, and endless grass. The economic version is hundreds of thousands of animals, thousands of relay stations, conquered specialists, assigned taxes, and emergency spending when nature stopped cooperating. The rider was never self-sufficient. The system was paying for him.